So good morning. It's good to be with you this morning. Yes, some of you guys are far away. What is with churches? Really, it doesn't matter where you go, what church. Like there must be something, maybe there's like COVID contagious chairs or something in the front of the church or something, you know. Everyone seems terrified. Or maybe all the preachers have got COVID and they worry about being spat on or something. I don't know. Eh? Sure. You all having a good year so far? You guys don't seem too sure about that, huh? Yeah. I find this year is racing already. I don't know about you guys, but my word. So I want to talk a bit this morning about courageous living. And it just seems to be a trend or a theme that I'm picking up that God is doing in many Christians' lives at the moment, or He's challenging people to look at the way we're living and how we just doing life, you know. And I think many Christians through this this time that we've gone through over the last almost 2 years now, it just seems like fear has gripped not only the world but particularly the church and Christians. And I think God's calling us to a different life and a different way of doing things. And I'll share some things as we go along. But if you will turn with me to Deuteronomy 31, and I'll be reading from 31 verse 1. Then Moses went out and spoke these words to all Israel. I am now 120 years old, and I am no longer able to lead you. The Lord has said to me, you shall not cross the Jordan. The Lord your God himself will cross over ahead of you. He will destroy these nations before you, and you will take possession of their land. Joshua also will cross over ahead of you, as the Lord said, and the Lord will do to them what he did to Sihon and Og. I don't know, however you want to pronounce that oak's name. The kings of the Amorites, whom he destroyed along with their land. The Lord will deliver them to you, and you must do to them all that I have commanded you. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Then Moses summoned Joshua and said to him in the presence of all Israel, be strong and courageous, for you must go with this people into the land that the Lord swore to their ancestors to give them, and you must divide it among them as their inheritance. The Lord himself goes before you, and he will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid and do not be discouraged. Extremely powerful message, passage that I found. So if we look at courage, what is courage? What is your definition of courage? And courage is defined as the quality of mind or spirit that enables a person to face difficulty, danger, or pain without fear. Some other descriptions of courage are: courage is grace under pressure. Courage is fear that has said its prayers. That's Karl Barth said that. Courage is doing what you are afraid to do. There can be no courage unless you are afraid. Eddie Rickenbacher. But my best one, if you know Dave, who I work with every day of my life, if you know Dave and you know his cowboy and blue tassel jacket and whatever, my favorite theologian, John Wayne. You know John Wayne? Yeah? You guys awake? Got a sense of humor? You know John Wayne, the cowboy? He said, courage is being scared to death, but saddling up anyway. So, if I look at courage, and I look at Joshua particularly, the character that I want to pick on this morning, and if I look at his life story, and I look at him, if you go back to Numbers, probably 11, 12, 13, if you remember, the Israelites had come through through Egypt. They had got over the sea, and they were looking into the promised land. And Moses sent Caleb and Joshua and 10 other scouts into the promised land and said, "Go and look at it. Go and see what is taking place there." And the 12 spies went out and had a look. And Joshua and Caleb came back with, let me start with the 10 guys first. The 10 spies came back with a discouraging report. And they said, the enemy cities are way too big and too strong. Their armies are too great. And we cannot defeat them. We are like grasshoppers to these people. There's no way that the people of Israel will be strong enough to defeat them. But Joshua and Caleb thought they just looked at the report and listened to the thing, and they just said, "No, this is nonsense. If we trusted God, moved forward, and took the land as God instructed them, we would be victorious." That was the report from 2 verses the 10. And unfortunately, the Israelites chose the consensus. And they chose to ignore the step and the courage and the report of what Caleb and Joshua were saying. And because of that, they spent 40 years walking around a desert, never actually walking into the fullness that God had for them. And I was wondering how many times in my life have I been in desert places because I've been afraid to... You guys don't mind me taking my slops off, do you? You are a vineyard after all. How many times in my life have I been afraid to venture into things or do things because I know what God has said to me, I know the promises God's had for me, but my natural fear or maybe perhaps anxiety or my logic has got in my way, and I've chosen to go with the fear route or the easy route and have missed out on so much that God has had for me. And then we want to know why. God, why am I in this desert? Why do I feel so like this and that and whatever else? But so often God has spoken and given instruction, and we choose to ignore him because of fear. So this very same Joshua is about to take over from Moses. Moses, he had thrown his toys, he had thrown temper tantrums and whatever, and eventually God had had enough, and he said, "Listen, you will not inherit. You will not go into the promised land. I will take you to the edge of it, and you will see it, but you will not go into it." And he appointed Joshua to take over. And the incredible thing about Joshua is Joshua had lived his life and been like second to Moses and watched Moses. And, he had gone around, he had seen the miracles of God. But I'll pick up on that just now. And I wonder, for me, I'm just jumping around a little bit here, in my own life and what I see in society at the moment and what I see in churches with Christians. The amazing thing, I don't know about you guys, but I haven't heard any prophetic word about COVID. Has anyone heard a prophetic word about COVID itself? Has God spoken to anyone about COVID? No. God's been very quiet about COVID. But he hasn't been quiet about calling his people back to himself. He hasn't been quiet in calling his church into a deeper intimacy with him. He hasn't been quiet in calling Christians to a more authentic faith. I read the words of that last song were so relevant to what God is saying to his church right now. You see, I really believe that God has used COVID to say to his Christians, you know what? Go and get your house in order. And when I talk about that, I'm not talking about the church building. I'm not talking about the congregational church. I'm not even talking about the universal church as like an institution or whatever. I'm talking about the church as individuals. And I really believe that God has called Christians, you know what? You're going to have many time and lockdowns and whatever else. Use that time to sort your families out. Sort your relationships out. Sort your parenting out. Sort your marriage out. I really believe that. I know for myself, that first lockdown, that, remember those 6 weeks or 8 weeks, whatever it was? Like, my family is extremely busy. And it's not just my stuff and Karen's stuff at this, well, she was still at the school at that point and I was at church, but my boys are like crazy busy. I have amazing quiet times in my car all the time because I'm always in my car driving kids up and down from school and back and school and back. For 6 weeks, 8 weeks, I didn't have to drive anyone to school. I didn't have to drive anyone from school. I didn't have to go to any meetings. Didn't have to drive to meetings. I still had the odd one on Zoom and stuff. But it was an incredible time where we weren't allowed to go anywhere. So we were forced to be at home, and it was amazing. We could light fires in the afternoon because I didn't have to go anywhere. And we could sit around the fire, the boys could play their guitars, it was just an incredible time for us as a family. But on the other side, when we started coming out of lockdown, we started picking up the pieces. I don't know about the valley, if it's been the same year. But in the cities, a lot of people, work is an escape for them. So they pass each other. They get up in the morning and they leave and they go, and they don't actually deal with the stuff in their relationships. And stuff builds up, and now all of a sudden they're confronted with time, and I've got to face my stuff. And God starts challenging, and they start getting in, and people decide, well, am I going to work through this stuff? Am I going to do what God is calling me to do about leading my family, having good relationships, etc., having a good solid marriage? And many people decided, listen, this is too hard. I don't know where this is going to go. And, I don't know about, like I said, I don't know about the valley, but in P, there's been so many divorces and stuff and splits in marriages. It's through this last year and a half, 2 years. It's so, so sad. But I really believe that through what COVID is teaching many Christians is how to be courageous. Be courageous in your relationships, to dig into authentic connection with people, and how to do that well. So if I look at Joshua was a guy that had been with Moses, and just think about following Moses. Here's a guy who led a whole nation out of another nation. So I don't know how, in my mind, I don't know how you actually picture that in today's time. So it's like taking, the whole of Canada, or all of a sudden in America, and they won't let them out, and then you decide, okay, well, we're just walking north, and we're heading out here, and there's chaos and whatever happening. I use Canada because it's my wife's country, so they're rather strange people. She won't listen to this, I hope. But it's weird. It's like taking a whole nation out of another nation and moving to a land that God has promised you that you don't know. It's weird. It's different. It's difficult. Like in our modern mindsets to think about that. And Moses had confronted the Pharaoh, and he had gone through the seven plagues. 7 plagues, yeah. For a moment I thought it was 8. I missed one. He had gone through the 7 plagues, and they started walking, and then all of a sudden they come to the sea, and Egypt are coming behind them, and they've got the sea in front of them, and all of a sudden, what do? And Moses led them through the sea and onto the other side, etc., etc. And now God has said to Moses, listen, you're not going, bud. And I'm appointing Joshua to do this. And it took an incredible amount of Joshua just to say, yes, God, I'm going to do this. And he had watched Moses. The people had followed Moses for years and years and years and years. But Joshua was such a character and knew God so well and so much that he was prepared to do this. And I've got 3 things I want to say about Joshua this morning. And the main thing about this is Joshua's belief determined his behavior. What Joshua believed determined his behavior. What you believe will determine your behavior. What I believe determines mine. And the first thing that Joshua believed was that God was all-powerful. You see, Joshua hadn't just read Sunday school stories. Joshua hadn't just listened to his parents and said, listen, you need to do this, or read your book and whatever else. Joshua had actually lived the plagues as probably a little teenage young kid, pretty much like the guys that have been sitting around here. Joshua was that sort of age. And he watched the plagues come across Egypt. He watched Moses lift up his staff as they're about to cross the sea. And he watched the water part and walk across. And when he got to the other side, he saw God just crash the water. And the Egyptians were taken out. He watched God provide manna every single day when they had nothing really. He watched God provide fresh food for them every single day. He watched the Ark of the Covenant and the fire at night and the cloud in the day. He watched that. He followed that day in and day out. So he saw God hand at work. He saw that God was all-powerful. And because he knew it, because he believed it in his heart, he was prepared to take the challenge of leading Israel. He was prepared to lead Israel to all these different countries and lands and the Jerichos with the big walls and giants and all the obstacles that we would see in the natural. Joshua was prepared to take that on because he knew that God was all-powerful. He was prepared to go where God had said he would go because he had a backing. He knew that God would be with him. He knew that God would walk with him and take him through that. The second thing that Joshua believed was that God kept his promises. He knew that God was faithful. He knew that God had promised Abraham all the promises of where they go, that is the promised land. God knew that right through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and I will say this, even Ishmael, what God promised Abraham, that all his kids would inherit. And and God has stuck faithful to his promises. If I look at the Arab nations, they've got lots of oil and money. Yes, they haven't got the spirit of God in that yet, but that it's saying that God is doing something in the Muslim nations right across the world at the moment. They're probably the people group that God is reaching the most at the moment. But it's interesting, God continued to bless them because that's his promises. Some people look at me and like freak out. They're like, how can you say that? But Ishmael was a son of Abraham. God said, I will bless all your sons, all your children. They will be as the stars in the sky. So we either believe it or we don't believe it. And God is calling his people and his children back to himself. I had a friend who spent 3 years in Israel. In fact, he wanted to come with me this morning, but something came up. And he just said to me, he said, Gav, the Jewish nation need Jesus. We have this perception that all Israel is saved. But we forget they've rejected Jesus. And we as Christians need to be praying that they receive Jesus. Just as the Muslims, just as every tribe and tongue throughout the world that hasn't heard, just as much as we might have friends and neighbors in our society that don't have Jesus, we need the courage to be praying and trusting that God will fulfill his promises and his plans for the people that he calls to himself. Not so? Have you got courage to trust God for that in your life? So God is faithful. God is true to all his promises. And who's had a prophetic word in their life before? Anyone? One person, two people, three people? Slowly getting a bit more. Some of you never had prophetic words. Serious. Or you just don't want to put up your hands. The reality is that many of us have received prophetic words. Many of us have received promises from God. But unfortunately, we are growing up in a time where God, if we get a prophetic word, people often say, oh, yeah, God said I need to do this. I see this particularly with young people. I still classify myself as relatively young. But, I see that with my kids, and it's a different world we're growing up in. And if we want food, you go to a place and you get food straight away. You don't have to cook it and prepare it and whatever else. If you want coffee, you've got hot water, you pour your thing there. You don't have to wait for it to percolate. There's like instant. Everything is instant. So we get prophetic words and we think, God's given us a prophetic word. It's got to be instant. God's given us something as a promise. It's got to be now. And we forget that God doesn't work on our instant society. He promised, he called David, anointed David to be king. 13 years later, David became king. You see, through those promises, we learn character, we learn perseverance, we learn what God wants to teach us. But unfortunately, many of us don't have the courage, and many Christians don't have the courage to walk it out. We get impatient, and we get, oh no, well, God's bailed on us, and it takes time and courage to trust God, to walk it out until we get to that point. Because God will promise, what He promises, He fulfills. And then the last thing about Joshua, what he believed. He believed that God was always with him. He trusted God. He knew God was with him. He saw God walking with them right through 40 years of the desert. He saw God's presence with the people. He knew whatever God said to him, whatever God had promised him, he saw the power of God, and he knew that God would be with him. How many of us trust that God is with us through every little struggle, pain, failure, disappointment that we've had in our lives? That God has been with us in those. Has it been easy? No. Was 40 years in the desert easy? No. But God remains with us. And He doesn't promise us that, I'll just take all your pain away. I'll take all your struggles away. You become a Christian, all of a sudden you spontaneously become rich. You get given a house, you get given a car, everything in your life just becomes easy. He doesn't promise that. He doesn't promise that at all. And in fact, He says, in this world you will have trials, you will have struggles. But Jesus says it, and God says it through Moses here to the people. And He says, but do not be afraid. Take courage. Be courageous. Do not be afraid. And He encourages us and challenges us to turn our eyes to Him. So I know for me, I've just because literally I think COVID has made people insane. It's supposed to be like a virus, but I think it affects people's brains more than it does anything else. And I see people at home, and Christians are unfortunately the worst. You've got the two camps that have arrived. You've got the pro-vaxxers and you've got the anti-vaxxers. And I'm talking about the extreme sides. I know there are a lot of people in the middle, but you've got the extreme and you've got the extreme. And you're seeing people, and I've seen families that do not speak to one another because this one's been vaccinated. So the whole family decide, well, we're not talking to that person. We have written them off, basically excommunicated them for a vaccine. And I'm going, how? Why? Because for me, it's very clear. Scripture, the Pharisees quoted Jesus, and they say, Jesus, they're obviously trying to trick him. They say, what are the greatest commandments? And Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love one another. Everything else in our Christian faith hang or hinge, or use whatever word you want to, on those two commandments. Because if we're loving God and we're loving people, you know what? It doesn't matter what they're doing. It doesn't even matter how they're behaving. If we're loving them, we're not judging them. We were never called to judge anyone. We were never called to say what is, whatever. Nothing says in the Bible, well, if you're vaccinated, you love Jesus. If you don't love you, or vice versa. If I'm loving Jesus, and I'm loving my friends and my family and people like that, it changes everything. Even people in your family that don't know Jesus and are struggling with sin in their life and struggling with different things in life, if you love them, there's an opportunity that they can experience the love of Jesus through you. If you're judging them, they receive that judgment. And then they think, well, well, it's not worth it. We are called to judge and not judge. We are called to pray and to love. And that sometimes takes hectic courage, because we as a people naturally want to control things. And when we lay down control, that's when courage rises up in us. And when we're courageous enough to lay down control and just allow God, things begin to happen in our lives and the community and the people around us. So courage, to have great courage, we have to relinquish and release control to God. And that is what Joshua was prepared to do. He could have said, let's do this, this, this. But he said, you know what? God is in control. God is my lead. God is my guide. And what he believed in God determined how he behaved. What are we helping people believe in God? What is the belief that we have? Do we believe God can change things in people's lives? And the struggles and the pains that they go through? Do we believe it? Or sometimes we are so scared that, we might not know what's going on. And therefore we want to control. And once we want to control people and control things, we take the power away from God. I think one of the joys for me about being a parent and watching my boys, I don't know if some of you were here when my eldest son left school, and he was pretty much selected for the S under 21. I did tell the story. I remember I told the story for the S and indoor cricket side just before COVID hit, whatever. And he basically just had to go to Pretoria, do all the things, whatever. And the Friday he was leaving, he just said, Dad, I'm not going. Like, trip to Australia, World Cup, everything. He's like, Dad, I'm done. I don't want to do this. As a father and a cricket lover and everything, it was like, are you insane? You have this amazing opportunity, and plane tickets, everything was paid for. And he said, I'm not going, I'm done. So what do you do? What do you do as a dad? You know what? He's 18 years old. He's finished school. I've got to allow him the freedom to make that decision. As much as it broke my heart, as much as I'm thinking, you idiot, I had to say to him, okay, but the consequence for that is you need to pay the plane ticket money back. That's just the bottom line. I said, it's fine, but there are consequences to this because you could have done this before, whatever. Anyways, the whole process. And anyway, he paid his plane ticket money back. But as a dad, I had to relinquish control and allow him to make his own decisions. And I don't know if he will. He says he hasn't. But if he ever has regrets, it's a consequence and a decision that he made. He can never blame me or say, I didn't give him that opportunity. It was that whole thing of relinquish control and allowing him to process it and deal with it in his life. And it's so hard. I'm looking at, I've got two other kids as well, boys that do things. And there's that element where I've got to teach them values and help them to make decisions in their life by those values. So I teach them the courage and what God has done in our lives. We model that and we say to them, this is the values that we choose to live by. And you try and model those values and teach them and give them opportunities to make decisions as they move into becoming adults. And you trust. I can make a lot of decisions for them. It's quite easy to do that. But I've got to give them the freedom. Like my middle son's now in matric, and he's trying to toy about what he's going to do next year. So there's options of him going to play cricket in the UK, go to Canada. There's things, and or go to study, And these are different conditions, and we're saying, okay, this option, going through all the pros and the cons, but you want to give them the power. So it's easy to say, listen, you will go study, but that's control, and you're not helping them to discover their life. And Jesus does that with us all the time. He gives us opportunities and situations in our lives and shows us how he would do it through the word. But he says to you, know what? You can make that decision. Take courage. Be courageous. Don't be afraid. Just because it might seem hard doesn't mean that we can't overcome it. Are we prepared to do that? God gives us those opportunities all the time. I just want to end with a little story about a 5-year-old. I just love this little story. It was so cute. So 5-year-old Johnny was in the kitchen as his mother made supper. She asked him to go into the pantry and get her a can of tomato soup, but he didn't want to go alone. It's dark in there, and I'm scared. She asked again, and he persisted. Finally, she said, "It's okay. Jesus will be in there with you." Johnny walked hesitantly to the door and slowly opened it. He peeked inside, saw it was dark, and started to leave. When all at once an idea came to him, and he said, "Jesus, if you're in there, would you hand me the can of tomato soup, please?" I just thought that it was cool. So I just want to encourage you guys, as we go into 2022, don't get focused on COVID. Yes, it's real. It's out there, and there are precautions and all that. And for me and what I've been saying to guys I've come in contact with, do all that you're supposed to do, but live your life with courage. Live your life on what Jesus wants you to do. This is a trial that Jesus said. It's one of the things that we will face. But it doesn't mean because we have a mask on that we stop talking about Jesus. If we've got a mask on, it doesn't mean we stop interacting with people. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden everyone out there doesn't need to hear Jesus, doesn't need to hear the word, doesn't need healing. Yeah, they might have a mask on, but they perhaps have got a dislocated hip or something. It still means we can pray for their hip for them to be healed. People still need healing. People still need Jesus. So despite whatever's going on around you and in your life or whatever, I want to say to you, be courageous. Take courage. Do not be afraid, because God is with you. Amen. Shall we stand together and let's pray?